Right now, your body may be experiencing a deep, heavy exhaustion that feels as though your physical frame is a leaking vessel, unable to hold on to vitality, focus, or strength. You might be lying awake in the darkness, carrying a quiet shame for feeling permanently drained, as if your inability to maintain a standard of relentless energy is a personal failure. There is a silent, exhausting struggle in trying to force a depleted mind and a fragile body to act like an unbreakable monument of productivity for a demanding world. You are not broken because your reserves have run low, and what you are feeling tonight is not a structural defect. Tonight, we will not force your mind to be silent, nor will we demand that you magically refill an empty container. We are simply going to step into a cool, subterranean root cellar, cut into a damp, mossy hillside, where the air is still and the earth knows exactly how to cradle. A porous vessel that has run out of strength. Let the immediate surroundings of your room slow down, noticing how the cool air carries a quiet, grounding dampness, much like the smooth limestone walls of an underground storehouse where the frantic noise of the upper world cannot penetrate. The heavy texture of this subterranean air rests softly against your skin, and the faint, rhythmic sound of water dripping in a dark, distant corner creates a steady cadence that requires nothing from you. You are safe enough to soften the defensive tightness in your jaw, letting your shoulders sink completely into the surface beneath you. For you do not have to solve your whole life tonight. Take a slow breath, letting the cool, earth-scented air fill your lungs without any pressure to make the breath perfect or deep, and let it pass through your lips like a long, soft sigh. Dear friend, nothing is required of you. In this hour, no depleted reservoirs must be artificially forced to overflow tonight. The mind does not regain its vital heat by aggressively sealing every crack through sheer willpower or by shaming the body for its natural boundaries. True, inner liberation begins with a surprising insight from Buddhist wisdom, the illusion of a permanent, impermeable self that must never show weakness is the very source of your chronic exhaustion. We believe that if we can just patch every leak, hide our fatigue, and present an unyielding facade of strength to the world, we will finally be safe from judgment. But the great paradox of suffering is that our frantic effort to look completely invulnerable is what causes our deepest internal fractures. All form is naturally porous, interconnected, and constantly flowing. Trying to force your life to be an airtight vessel is what drains the spirit. If it feels right, you can give up the struggle of pretending to be okay, allowing your awareness to drift down into a cool temple cellar where a young novice is about to discover why a leaking jar is deeply valued by the ground beneath it. Many seasons ago, in a quiet valley where the winter frosts arrived early, a young novice named Sora was assigned the sole responsibility of managing the temple's winter preserves. His domain was a vast, subterranean root cellar excavated deep within a damp, mossy hillside, a place where the air remained perpetually cool and smelled of dark loam, limestone, and ancient clay. Sora took an intense, hyper-vigilant pride in his work, believing that the cleanliness and perfection of the storehouse were a direct reflection of his spiritual worth. He spent his days arranging heavy pots of salted ferns, drying roots, and stacking stone weights, terrifyingly afraid that an oversight would expose him as careless or undisciplined to the elder monastics who lived above. Deep within the darkest corner of the limestone cellar, sat the temple's most precious winter provision, an exceptionally large, unglazed earthenware jar filled to the brim with wild forest honey. The honey had been gathered from the high hollows of old oaks, thick and dark golden, meant to sustain the community through the bitterest months of the snow season. One evening, as Sora conducted his silent, night inventory by the dim light of a single tallow wick, his heart sank into a cold panic. He noticed a thin, glistening trail of gold moving down the rough outer side of the vessel. The unglazed clay was porous, and under the immense, heavy pressure of the syrup within, the jar had begun to slowly weep its contents through its thick walls, forming a sticky pool on the dark earth floor. Shamed by what he immediately perceived as a catastrophic defect in his care, Sora refused to leave the cellar to rest. He found a blunt oak scraping spatula and knelt on the damp loam, frantically scraping the escaped honey from the sides of the clay and trying to force the vessel to stay perfectly dry. His back grew stiff from the awkward posture, his fingers cramped from gripping the wood, and his mind filled with a bitter stream of self-blame. He told himself that if he were a more mindful practitioner, if he possessed a stronger spirit, he would know how to prevent this leaking of the temple's treasure. For hours he conducted his exhausting ritual, his arms shaking with fatigue, his entire night consumed by the desperate need to hide the vessel's fragility before the morning light arrived. As the small wick flickered in the heavy subterranean air, the quiet rustle of hemp robes sounded near the wooden steps. Sister Kaya, the old temple cellar master and medicine maker, walked slowly into the chamber, her faded robes carrying the sharp medicinal scent of crushed winterberries. Her face was a landscape of deep weather lines, and her voice, when she spoke, carried the slow, heavy resonance of water drops falling onto a limestone slab in the deep dark. She did not raise her hand in anger, nor did she audit the neatness of the shelves. She simply watched the young novice as he frantically scraped the clay with his blunt spatula. In a moment, this story will show us something even quieter. Sister Kaya walked to the edge of the large vessel, her large worn hands resting loosely within her sleeves. Why are you spending your sleeping hours fighting the nature of unglazed earth, young novice? She asked softly, her eyes observing the raw tension in Sora's neck. You believe that this weeping is a failure of your container, but your own frantic scraping is what is tearing your piece to pieces. Lift the spatula from the dirt, Sora, and look at what the ground is actually doing with what your vessel cannot hold. And this is where the mind begins to soften. Sora's hand remained frozen around the handle of the blunt oak spatula, his fingers locked so tightly into the grain of the wood that his knuckles showed a bloodless porcelain white in the dim tallow light. The tip of the wooden blade was pressed firmly into the dark loam of the cellar floor, right at the edge of the great, unglazed earthenware jar where a thick, viscous pool of amber syrup had gathered. The silence that followed Sister Kaya's question seemed to expand outward into the damp corners of the underground room, filling the space between the rows of heavy preserve pots and the stacked limestone weights. The young novice did not immediately move. His chest heaved with a shallow, ragged rhythm, the cold cellar air catching in his throat like a physical knot. He felt a profound wave of heat rise to his face, the burning, suffocating flush of a hidden fragility suddenly brought into the light. The old cellar master stepped closer, her movements making no more sound than a soft draft passing through dry grass. The hem of her faded hemp robe, stained with the permanent purple hues of pressed elderberries, and dark forest juices, brushed against the damp floor as she knelt down beside him. She did not attempt to take the oak spatula from his grip, nor did she offer a reassuring touch to his trembling shoulders. Instead, she simply reached out with one long, wrinkled finger and pointed downward, directing his frantic eyes away from the weeping sides of the clay vessel and into the dark, porous earth beneath its heavy circular base. Look closely at the loam, Sora. Sister, Kaya murmured, her voice carrying that slow, unhurried resonance that sounded like water dripping in the deep dark of a cavern. You have spent your entire night treating this moisture as an invading enemy, a stain that proves your failure to maintain a perfect temple storehouse. But the earth has no interest in your standards of an airtight world. Look at what is actually happening beneath the clay. Sora forced his gaze downward, his eyes stinging from the smoke of the single tallow wick. For hours, he had been so consumed by the frantic need to scrape the escaped honey back into a neat pile that he had completely missed the life moving within the dirt. The dark, unpolished loam floor was not rejecting the thick amber fluid that seeped through the unglazed pottery walls. It was drinking it. The porous earth was absorbing the forest syrup into its deep, cool matrix, turning the dry, dusty floor into a rich, fragrant bed of dark moisture. The scent rising from the floorboards was no longer just the cold, bitter smell of stone and limestone. It had blended with the wild, concentrated sweetness of the sun-warmed oaks from which the bees had gathered the nectar. The soil was softening, opening up, and becoming profoundly fertile. In the dark, nourished by the very leakage that the young novice had judged as a catastrophic ruin. The blunt oak spatula in Sora's hand began to feel immensely heavy, an artificial barrier held up by nothing but the desperate energy of his own pride. He had been using this simple tool not to care for the temple's winter provisions, but to police the boundaries of a reality he could not control. He had convinced himself that if he allowed the jar to weep, if he allowed the community to see that the most precious container in the cellar was inherently porous and leaking its essence into the dirt, he would be cast out as an unmindful, undisciplined failure. His entire identity as a dedicated practitioner had become bound up in the impossible task of keeping an unglazed vessel perfectly dry, turning his service into a silent, agonizing night of self-punishment. What happened next changed the way he understood suffering. Sister Kaya reached down and gently placed her palm over his tense, locked fingers, her skin feeling as cool and steady as a river stone that had rested in the shade for 100 seasons. She did not pull his hand away. She merely allowed the weight of her presence to meet the rigid resistance in his wrist. "Take a slow breath, young novice," she whispered, letting the heavy, sweet air of the room guide her words. There is no supervisor from the upper temple coming down these steps to count the drops. The only tribunal existing in this cellar tonight is the one you have built inside your own thoughts. Sora felt a sudden, sharp ache bloom behind his eyes, a deep emotional recognition that went far beyond his fatigue in the root cellar. He realized that this was not the first night. He had spent frantically scraping the edges of his life, trying to hide his depletion from the world. For years, long before he had ever put on the hempen robes of a novice, he had treated his own body and mind like an earthenware vessel that was never permitted to show a single leak. Whenever his energy had run low, whenever the heavy pressures of his duties had caused his spirits to weep or his focus to fracture, he had met his own vulnerability with the exact same blunt, unforgiving spatula of self-judgment. He had spent his life denying his own fatigue, masking his fragility behind an unyielding facade of competence, terrified that if he stopped performing for even a single day, his entire world would see him as empty and insufficient. The young novice let out a long, trembling exhalation that seemed to carry the accumulated tightness of 1,000 unconfessed anxieties out into the dark spaces of the room. Slowly, intentionally, he allowed his fingers to uncurl from the handle of the oak tool, letting the spatula drop completely onto the damp earth at his feet. The wooden handle made a soft, hollow sound as it hit the loam, a quiet surrender that signaled the end of his frantic night battle. For the first time in many hours, he stepped back from the bow of his own effort, allowing his arms to hang loosely by his sides, his chest exposed to the cool, subterranean air of the cellar. The physical sensation of his own exhaustion rushed into his awareness like an incoming tide, no longer blocked by the frantic momentum of his work. He felt the deep, burning ache in the small of his back, the heavy, lead-like fatigue weighing down his eyelids, and the cold, hollow emptiness in his stomach. It was an immense, disorienting vulnerability, yet it was completely free of the sharp, stinging poison of shame. He was profoundly tired. His container was undeniably leaking, and he had no idea how to make the clay impermeable. Yet, as he sat there on the cold loam floor beside the old medicine maker, he noticed that the roof of the cellar did not cave in. The stacked jars of ferns remained steady on their shelves. The limestone weights did not crack, and the earth beneath him continued to hold his heavy frame with a total, uncritical security. Sister Kaya picked up the discarded spatula and laid it across her knees, her lined face reflecting the soft, yellow glow of the tallow wick. The clay of this jar was dug from the very bottom of our own valley. Sora, she said, her large hands smoothing the dark wood of the tool. It was never meant to be a cold, hard piece of iron. If the potter had glazed these walls and sealed every pore to make it airtight, the wild honey inside would never be able to breathe with the changes of the seasons. It would turn sour and bitter in the dark, choking on its own richness because it had no relationship with the earth outside. The weeping is not a disease of the pot, it is the way the vessel stays alive in the frost. Sora looked at the great unglazed jar, watching a golden bead of honey slowly emerge from the textured clay wall, hang suspended for a long, quiet moment, and then drop softly into the dark loam below. The vessel looked beautiful in its vulnerability, its rough, earthy contours completely aligned with the quiet sanctuary of the underground room. He saw that the leakage was not a waste, nor was it a sign of ruin. It was a continuous, silent conversation between the clay and the ground, a reminder that nothing on this earth is ever truly separate or completely sealed. He reached out with his bare palm, not to scrape or correct, but simply to touch the cool, damp exterior of the jar, allowing his own tired skin to meet the porous nature of the earth. And this is where the mind begins to soften. The quiet stillness that settled between Sora and the old medicine maker in the damp air of the root cellar is the very same spaciousness that is waiting for you right now within the private boundaries of your own dark room. As you lie here listening to the steady, unhurried rhythm of this voice, let the image of that porous clay vessel resting in the cool loam sink deeply into your awareness. This ancient wisdom is not an invitation to stop feeling the natural, poignant vulnerabilities of your human life, nor is it a cold command to harden yourself into an indifferent stone that never experiences exhaustion or sorrow. Buddhist insights are never designed to turn you into an empty, unfeeling shell, isolated from the world and immune to the genuine limits of your physical body. It is showing us something infinitely quieter, a way to exist, where the value of your being is no longer tied to how perfectly you can conceal your depletion from the world. When we look into the dark spaces of our own overthinking tonight, we can begin to see that our deepest exhaustion does not actually stem from the simple fact that our energy has run low. The truest suffering grows from the way the mind holds that depletion and the silent, relentless war we wage against our own natural boundaries. The Buddha pointed toward a profound truth about human pain, showing us that when we experience a limitation or a sudden loss of vitality, our hearts are often pierced by two entirely separate arrows. The first arrow is the original condition, the undeniable reality of a body that feels heavy, a mind that has run out of fuel, or a spirit that is temporarily leaking its strength under the immense pressures of life. This first pain is a natural, unavoidable consequence of living in a changing, impermanent world where no container remains permanently full. But the second arrow is the one we launch into our own core through the mechanism of shame and self-judgment. The second arrow is the internal commentary that stands over our exhaustion with a blunt wooden spatula, frantically demanding that we fix the leak, hide the vulnerability, and force our tired frame to perform like an unbreakable monument. We believe that if we can just condemn our fatigue intensely enough, we can somehow sculpt ourselves into an airtight, impermeable vessel that never disappoints anyone. But this constant, aggressive self-audit is what turns a temporary state of depletion into a chronic, suffocating trauma. Buddhist wisdom helps us to see this dynamic clearly, so that we can finally choose to stop driving the second arrow into the very places where we are already bleeding. The suffering is not in the weeping clay. The suffering is in our desperate, Latinite refusal to let the container be porous. When we translate these ancient reflections into the modern emotional language of your daily life, we can understand exactly how attachment and craving operate within your tired muscles. Attachment is not a gentle form of dedication or care. It is the rigid, unyielding demand of the ego that says, I must remain a flawless, untiring source of productivity and strength, or I am completely unworthy of love and belonging. It is a desperate craving to possess an absolute guarantee of invulnerability, a tight constriction that treats every natural boundary as a personal failure that must be hidden away in the dark. When we hold on to this illusion of an airtight self, we turn our entire existence into an exhausting performance of composure, smiling on the outside, while our interior life is weeping its vital essence into the dirt. The more aggressively we try to seal our cracks through self-hatred, the more violent the internal pressure becomes, until our very bones begin to fracture under the strain of our own expectations. Impermanence, when understood through the quiet safety of this evening, is not a cold philosophical doctrine that threatens your security. It is the gentle, reassuring reminder that your energy, your clarity, and your physical capacity are never meant to remain fixed in a single, unchanging posture. Just like the forest honey inside the unglazed jar, your life force is a living, breathing phenomenon that naturally expands and contracts with the shifting seasons of your world. There are winter periods where the nectar must turn thick, heavy, and quiet, sinking down into the dark storehouse of your being to rest beneath the frost, expecting your container to pour forth an endless, uninterrupted stream of gold without ever tasting the stillness of depletion is a profound violation of your own nature. Letting go does not mean you abandon your responsibilities or walk away from the people you love. It simply means you release the extra, agonizing struggle of trying to be an iron fortress when your spirit is asking to be a porous clay jar. Mindfulness, in this soft light, is the spacious capacity to sit on the cellar floor of your own mind and notice your deep exhaustion without immediately picking up the spatula to punish it. It is the ability to say to yourself, right now, my container is empty, my clay is weeping, and I am profoundly tired, without allowing that observation to turn into a verdict of unworthiness. Awareness is the wide, undisturbed field of quiet presence that can hold the physical sensation of depletion without becoming identical to it. You are the deep, cool subterranean room that contains the vessel. You are not the crack in the pottery. A wave of intense body shame or a sudden panic about being behind in life can float through your thoughts in the dark. But if you do not provide a hard, defensive wall of resistance for it to strike against, it cannot fracture your peace. It is simply a passing draft moving through the limestone blocks, leaving your true, indestructible nature completely untouched. Slowly, the teaching becomes personal, within the quiet architecture of your own breath. When we meet our limitations, not with the blunt instrument of self-correction, but with the boundless warmth of genuine compassion, our entire relationship with difficulty undergoes a radical shift. We begin to realize that the raw vulnerability we have been fighting for so long is not an enemy that must be conquered through sheer willpower. Compassion is the quiet courage to let your tired hands drop to the earth, allowing the escaped honey of your energy to soak directly into the unpolished ground beneath you. It is the understanding that what escapes your vessel is never truly lost or wasted. It is simply returning to the vast, unconditional matrix of life that sustains every living thing on this earth. The liberating truth of this path reminds us that peace is never found by successfully building a perfectly sealed, invulnerable life where nothing ever leaks or breaks. Peace is the radical, gentle willingness to realize that you do not have to be an intact, flawless monument to have a sacred value in this dark room. Your original nature is vast, porous, and completely woven into the deep, supportive floor of the world, perfectly held even when your container feels completely spent. By choosing to let the wooden tools of your self-correction lay still upon the loam tonight, you are not surrendering to failure. You are simply refusing to spend another midnight treating your own sensitivity as a crime. You are giving the hard, sun-baked crust of your performance permission to dissolve, allowing your presence to blend perfectly with the deep, unmonitored tranquility of the evening. In a moment, this story will show us something even quieter, guiding your awareness into a soft, internal practice where your body can learn how to lay down its protective armor and rest directly within its own natural space. You do not have to fill your reservoir before you are permitted to let your eyelids become heavy, and you do not have to repair your fragile boundaries to deserve a soft pillow and a quiet mind tonight. You are safe enough to let the walls of your vessel breathe with the darkness, and this is where the mind begins to soften. If it feels right, let your attention slide entirely away from the world of concepts and definitions, allowing your awareness to drop softly into the living, breathing environment of your own physical frame as it rests here tonight. There is no requirement for you to achieve a state of perfect, unmoving stillness, and there is no hidden ledger evaluating how deeply you are able to quiet your thoughts. In this hour, we are not setting out to repair your mind through an act of aggressive discipline, nor are we going to demand that you artificially plug the leaks in your energy or force your tired reservoirs to instantly overflow. We are simply giving the heavy structure of your body full permission to step off the hard highway of the day's expectations. Notice the unadorned, steady pressure of your heels, your calves, the back of your hips, and your shoulder blades as they settle into the matrix beneath you. You do not have to carry the heavy architecture of your life right now. The surface supporting you is entirely capable of absorbing your fatigue, your disorientation, and your emptiness without asking for a single word of explanation. Take an unhurried invitation to notice the simple movement of your breathing, letting the air arrive through your nostrils without forcing it into a rigid, artificial count. There is no special virtue in shaping your inhalation into a perfect, symmetrical pattern, nor do you need to expand your lungs until it causes tension under your ribs. You might simply observe the natural, gentle widening of your chest, followed by the slow, effortless release that happens when you stop trying to hold on to the air. With each quiet exhalation, you might imagine that the outer boundary of your skin is becoming just a little more porous, like that old unglazed clay jar resting in the cool stillness of the subterranean root cellar, allowing its tight grain to open up and breathe in perfect harmony with the damp, unmoving darkness. As you lie here in the shadows of your room, you may become aware of one persistent thought, one recurring memory of a mistake, or one heavy calculation about your daily duties that has been pacing the floor of your mind all evening. Do not try to violently push this thought out of your attention, and do not judge yourself for carrying a deep sense of insufficiency into your bed. Shaming yourself for feeling depleted is only another way of picking up that blunt oak spatula to frantically scrape the sides of your own heart, adding a fresh layer of internal friction to a spirit that is already profoundly tired. Instead, look at this familiar emotional pattern with a sense of soft, uncritical curiosity, as if you were observing a faint trail of moisture moving down a rough clay wall. What does it actually feel like inside the physical borders of your body when this anxiety about your strength rises to the surface? Perhaps there is a tight, burning contraction in the center of your throat, a heavy stiffness across your shoulders, or a cold, hollow ache right beneath your breastbone. Even noticing these small physical markers is enough. You do not have to dissolve them or cure them to be safe in this darkness. In a moment, this internal landscape will reveal an even deeper state of comfort. Perhaps, if it feels right, you might imagine that your own physical form is like that large, earthenware vessel, resting in the dark corner of the underground storehouse. See the framework of your bones and your muscles standing not as an airtight, iron vault designed to withstand an endless pressure, but as a soft, earthy container that is completely permitted to be porous for many months, or perhaps for your entire life. Your thoughts have been conducting a frantic latter-night audit, using the sharp tools of self-correction to seal every crack and hide your fatigue from the world around you. But right now, in the safety of this quiet room, you can let that wooden spatula drop completely onto the loam at your feet. You can let the tool go. There is no supervisor coming down the steps to inspect your reserves, and nothing is required of you but to simply exist within the shadow. Imagine taking that heavy, exhausting worry about your physical or emotional depletion and placing it gently into the textured clay walls of the jar itself. You are applying absolutely no muscular pressure to this anxiety. Your attention is merely a cool, grounding mist that wraps around the vessel, watching how the raw earth interacts with the fluid within. When the cold sensation of running out of strength moves through your awareness tonight, do not try to patch the leak, and do not try to force your container to stay perfectly dry. Just let the gold seep through the pores of the clay. Let the tension move completely outward, sliding down the sides of your container and dripping softly into the dark, unpolished loam floor beneath you. Watch what happens to the density of your overthinking when you give up the habit of fighting your own boundaries. Without the hard, tight walls of your resistance to bounce against, the sharp, stinging edge of your self-judgment begins to blur and soften in the dark. The thought of being not enough or permanently broken loses its power to torment your heart, turning from an invading enemy into a slow, neutral movement that blends perfectly with the immense, subterranean silence of your room. You are not destroying the fatigue. You are simply giving it so much spaciousness that it can no longer find a tight, defensive corner to suffocate your breath. The dark earth below you is not judging the leakage. It is drinking the moisture, absorbing your vulnerability into its deep, cool matrix, and turning the very place of your depletion into a rich, fertile ground that perfectly sustains your weight. Perhaps you might realize that when you stop trying to force yourself to be an unbreakable monument, the fragile spaces within your soul begin to transform on their own. The empty reservoir is no longer a personal failure that you must hide away in shame. It is the very quality that allows your spirit to touch the vast ground of being that holds everything. By allowing your lungs to remain porous and open, like a vessel that has ceased to fight its own clay nature, you let the residue of your daily exhaustion pass completely through your skin without leaving a new scar behind. You can return to this soft, buoyant touch whenever you are ready. There is no penalty if your mind tries to grab the scraping tool again. A few minutes from now, and no failure if the tight contraction returns to your throat. Each time the anxiety rises, you can simply notice the tightness, drop the spatula, and let the earth receive what you cannot hold. Let the image of the root cellar change very slowly now, fading back into the immediate, physical reality of your actual blanket and the quiet weight of your pillow, leaving you with nothing but the peaceful texture of this passing hour. The room around you remains entirely safe, and still the world outside continues its slow, unmonitored rotation through the dark, completely unbothered by the complex standards of perfection we build in our thoughts to torture ourselves. You do not have to fill your container before you are allowed to let your eyelids become heavy. Tonight, true healing is not a distant temple peak that you must reach through desperate, exhausting effort. It is the cool, supportive ground of awareness that has been cradling you all along, waiting for you to trust its depth. And this is where the teaching begins to touch your own heart. The passage of many days down, within the subterranean quiet of the root cellar, did not instantly banish Sora's internal unrest, nor did it turn him into an unbothered saint who lived in absolute harmony with his limitations. Although he had laid down the blunt oak spatula and allowed the dark loam floor to drink the weeping amber honey, a more insidious, silent desperation had begun to take root inside his practice. He had accepted that the unglazed clay vessel was porous, but his mind could not stop treating that softness as a problem that still required a clever human solution. He would lie on his thin straw mat at night, his own physical frame, aching with the deep leaden fatigue of a body that could not sustain its baseline of vitality, and his thoughts would obsessively plan a new way. He could not sit comfortably with the raw uncertainty of a leaking life, and so he resolved to build a perfect shield that would force the clay to become impermeable by sheer mechanical force. On a freezing morning, when the high valley walls were entirely white with crusts of mountain snow, Sora returned to the subterranean storehouse, carrying a large bolt of stiff, beeswax-coated linen cloth wrap. This material was dense, thick, and completely waterproof, heavily treated with melted comb-wax, until it was as rigid and unyielding as a sheet of cured leather. Standing alone in the dim tallow light, his own breathing ragged and heavy in the cold subterranean air, the young novice began to wrap the unglazed earthenware jar with frantic, muscular precision. He wound the stiff linen around the textured clay torso over and over, pulling the cloth so tight that his knuckles turned white and his shoulders locked into a rigid grid of absolute effort. He tied the bindings down with thick hempen cords, knotting them until the unglazed pottery was entirely encased within a dense, compressed armor of wax and fiber. When he finished, he stepped back, wiping the cold sweat from his forehead with the sleeve of his faded robe. For a few hours, his plan appeared to be an absolute success. The weeping golden trails disappeared behind the thick grey layers of the linen wrap, and the dark loam floor, beneath the heavy circular base, remained dry and undisturbed. Sora felt a sudden surge of triumphant relief. The addictive, exhausting validation of a mind that believes it has finally outsmarted its own vulnerability. He told himself that he had preserved the temple's winter treasure through his own ingenuity, and that by forcing the container to be perfectly airtight, he had finally eliminated the shame of his failure from the cellar. He sat on a low wooden crate, his posture stiff, guarding his work with an intense, vigilant eye, refusing to let his body collapse into the rest it was crying for, because his safety was still dependent on the success of his defense. But the deeper lesson had not yet revealed itself. As the quiet twilight began to settle through the thick timbers of the cellar ceiling, a low, ominous sound broke the silence of the underground room. It was a microscopic, high-pitched creak, a sound of immense internal tension that seemed to vibrate directly through the limestone floor. Sora leaned closer to the great jar, his heart pounding against his ribs. With a sudden, suffocating panic, under the tight, constrictive pressure of the unyielding beeswax wrap, the moisture within the jar had been denied its natural, porous exit. The internal pressure of the heavy forest syrup, unable to breathe or seep through the clay walls, had begun to push violently inward against the structure of the pot itself. Through a small gap in the linen binding, Sora saw a thin, dark hairline fracture, slowly opening along the shoulder of the earthenware vessel, threatening to split the entire jar into 100 useless pieces. His hands shook as he realized what his need for control had done. In his desperate attempt to force the vessel to be invulnerable, to stop the natural, soft weeping that connected the clay to the ground, he had created an internal strain so violent that it was destroying the very foundation of the container. He had turned a harmless, gentle relationship with the earth into a catastrophic breaking point. He reached out to tear at the hempen knots, but the cold beeswax wrap had frozen stiff in the cellar air, resisting his trembling fingers like a wall of solid stone. He was completely trapped by the parameters of his own defense, watching the fracture widen millimeter by millimeter, while his own breath became shallow and terrified in the dark. A soft, deliberate footstep sounded near the base of the wooden stairs, and Sister Kaya walked into the chamber, carrying a small iron knife used for trimming marsh reeds. She did not express surprise at the sight of the armored jar, nor did she shout at the young novice for endangering the temple's winter provisions. She simply stepped forward, her faded purple-stained robes rustling softly in the cool draft, and slipped the blunt tip of the iron blade beneath the tightest hempen cord. With one slow, downward stroke of her large, sap-stained hand, she severed the bindings, allowing the stiff beeswax linen to peel away from the clay like a layer of dead skin. The moment the constriction was released, the great earthenware jar seemed to let out a long, silent sigh of relief. The golden beads of forest honey instantly flooded through the porous walls, weeping out in thick, generous streams that ran down the textured clay and soaked directly into the damp loam below. The immediate outward movement of the syrup caused the internal pressure to drop instantly, halting the progress of the hairline fracture. Before it could split the core of the pot, the vessel remained whole, flawed and permanently scarred by the mark of the split, but completely stable once more within the quiet landscape of the room. Sister Kaya laid the severed linen cloth on the floor and looked into Sora's pale, exhausted face. You believe that your strength is demonstrated by how tightly you can bind your own skin, Sora, she said, her voice dropping like slow water onto stone. You think that if you can just build a wall thick enough to hide your fragility, you will finally be safe from the changes of the world. But look at what your armor has done to the clay. The jar was never threatened by its own softness. It was threatened by your refusal to let it breathe. The young novice dropped his head, a hot, silent tear sliding down his cheek and falling onto his bare foot. I am so tired of being broken, Elder, he whispered, his hands resting empty against his knees. I thought that, if I could just make this container strong, I would finally be a true monk, but I am only creating more ruin. The old cellar master reached out and guided his hand to the soft, damp hollow of earth, directly beneath the base of the jar, where the loam had become entirely saturated by the golden leakage. This clay jar does not need to become an iron monument to fulfill its purpose in this temple. Sora, she murmured softly, and it does not need your permission to be porous. Look at how the earth receives what the vessel cannot hold. The floor does not judge the honey as a waste. It balances the jar, cushions its weight, and turns the very space of your leakage into a sanctuary of sweetness. True transformation does not mean you never run out of strength. It means you finally stop treating your emptiness as a crime against your soul. Sora sat completely still for a long time, listening to the rhythmic, distant drip of water in the corner of the limestone wall. He looked at the scarred shoulder of the jar, seeing the dark line of the fracture where his own control had ground into the clay. He did not try to wipe the honey away, and he did not try to invent a new way to patch the seam. For the first time in his life, he simply sat with the reality of his own tired, fragile nature, allowing his breathing to slow down until it matched the immense, unhurried silence of the underground room. He saw that he did not have to become a magically perfect, unyielding vessel to belong to the earth. He was already completely held by the ground beneath him, exactly as he was, porous, spent, and beautifully human in the dark. And this is where the mind begins to soften. The profound silence that filled the subterranean storehouse when Sora finally rested his hands upon the weeping clay is the exact same stillness that is waiting for you right now, within the quiet borders of your own room. As you lie here in the deep shadows of the evening, let the image of that unglazed earthenware jar, with its dark hairline fracture and its soft golden trails, settle completely into your awareness. The lesson of the cellar is not an abstract theory to be studied, or a distant ideal to be achieved. When you are finally cured of your exhaustion, it is a mirror for the hidden architecture of your own overthinking, revealing the precise mechanism that turns a temporary state of physical or emotional depletion into a chronic, suffocating weight. Have you ever noticed how much energy your mind expends simply trying to hide your vulnerability from your own sight? We live in a culture that relentlessly worships the illusion of the unbreakable vessel. From our earliest years, we are taught that our value is directly tied to our capacity to remain impermeable, to hold on to our focus, our productivity, and our emotional composure without ever letting a single drop of fatigue leak through our surface. When life becomes intensely demanding, or when your physical frame naturally runs out of its vital reserves, a deep, hollow exhaustion opens up within your chest. But instead of meeting this depletion with the cool, grounding sanctuary of rest, the mind immediately panics. It views the natural softness of the clay as a dangerous, systemic failure. It assumes that if you allow yourself to be porous, if you admit that you cannot carry the entire weight of your world without weeping, you will be judged as permanently insufficient, broken, or left behind. To defend against this terrifying exposure, the mind constructs a dense, rigid armor of hypervigilance and self-judgment, wrapping your sensitivity in tight layers of overthinking. This internal armor is fueled by a desperate, exhausting craving for approval, a belief that if you can just perform strength perfectly enough, no one will ever detect the cracks in your container. You lie awake at night, replaying past conversations, checking your choices for flaws, and rehearsing your future actions like a soldier preparing for an endless campaign. You use shame as an artificial tool for self-improvement, telling your tired heart that if you just discipline yourself more severely, you can force your container to become completely airtight. But this is the core psychological trap behind all your suffering. The very armor you build to keep your vulnerability safe is the exact constriction that creates the deepest internal fractures. When we look through the lens of simple Buddhist insight, we begin to understand that our deepest torment never grows from the simple presence of our physical or emotional limits. One of the most liberating realizations of this path is the clear distinction between the first pain that life naturally brings to our door and the second pain that the mind aggressively adds through its resistance. The first pain is the raw reality of your current depletion, the undeniable fact that your body feels heavy, your mind is running dry, or your health has reached a natural boundary that cannot be crossed by force. This first pain is like the natural porosity of the unglazed jar. It is a temporary condition, an inevitable expression of living in a dynamic, changing world where all energy must naturally ebb and flow, like the seasons. We cannot always control when our reservoirs will run low, nor can we command our physical form to remain an unchanging, invulnerable monument for our convenience. But the second pain, the stinging, suffocating dread that keeps you pinned to your mattress tonight, is entirely generated by your refusal to let the vessel be porous. The second pain is the mental critique that stands over your exhaustion, frantically scraping the edges of your heart and treating your need for rest as a personal crime. We launch this second arrow into our own core every time we look at our tired frame and decide that our fatigue is a proof of our unworthiness. We turn our temporary emptiness into a permanent identity, telling ourselves a bitter story that we are uniquely weak, flawed, or incapable of handling our lives. The suffering does not reside in the weeping clay. The suffering lives entirely in our desperate effort to bind our container so tightly that it is no longer allowed to breathe with the atmosphere around us. The profound shift in your spiritual journey begins when you realize that you do not have to fix your boundaries or heal every fracture before you are permitted to experience inner peace. True liberation is not the complete absence of difficulty, nor is it a magical state where your body never grows tired and your mind never wanders into worry. Peace is simply a completely different relationship with your difficulty. It is the radical, gentle willingness to look at the hairline fractures in your pottery and realize they do not require a frantic Latinite repair. When you stop feeding the second pain through the mechanism of self-punishment, the original exhaustion loses its power to torment your heart. It ceases to be a catastrophic failure and returns to its natural status as a neutral, quiet interval of rest. Consider what happens to the density of your anxiety when you choose to act like that raw, unbaked clay tile rather than a hardened stone. When a wave of self-judgment or a sudden dread of the future moves through your awareness in the dark, you do not have to build a rigid, defensive wall to fight it. You do not have to pick up the wooden tool to scrape it away. You can simply allow your lungs to expand with a spacious, unforced rhythm, letting the dampness of the hour pass completely through your skin without finding a tight, resistant surface to bruise. By letting go of the desperate need to look perfectly intact, you allow the escaped energy of your life to settle directly into the unpolished loam beneath you, discovering that the ground has never dropped you, even for a single night. The vast field of quiet awareness that is listening to these words right now is completely independent of whether your container feels full or spent. You are the deep, cool, subterranean room that holds the pottery. You are not the crack in the clay. Your true nature has never been genuinely diminished by the periods of exhaustion you have survived this year, just as the silent limestone walls of the cellar were never ruined by the golden honey that dripped onto their floorboards. By allowing your hands to hang empty in the darkness, you are reclaiming the vital heat you were wasting on an impossible defense, leaving your spirit soft, porous, and free. You do not have to solve the long narrative of your life tonight to deserve a quiet mind, a soft pillow, and a deep, undisturbed rest. Now let this wisdom come closer to your own life. In a moment, we will explore how this soft subterranean perspective operates within the small, ordinary details of your daily routine, showing you that the unglazed spaces of your day are not an obstacle to your happiness, but the very place where your true freedom is waiting to be realized. But before we bring this teaching into your modern world, let your body take a slow, unhurried breath, letting the cool air fill the deepest chambers of your ribs and let it go like a quiet sigh into the dark. You are safe enough to unfasten the remaining cords of your vigilance, allowing your presence to blend perfectly with the deep, unmonitored tranquility of the evening. Now let this quiet cellar wisdom step out from the subterranean shadows and walk with you directly into the bright, cluttered environments of your ordinary modern day. It is easy to look at the ancient earthenware vessel and understand its need to be porous when we are wrapped in the safety of an evening story. But the true test of this insight arrives when the sun is up and the world demands that you show no weakness. We carry the heavy ghost of that rigid, airtight jar into our modern offices, our crowded streets, and our personal relationships, continuously policing our own boundaries, as if any sign of exhaustion were an unforgivable defect. We practice the painful art of the unyielding facade every time we force a bright, cheerful smile across our face, while our internal world is weeping from an unbearable weight of insufficiency. We do it when we sit at our desks, pushing through hours of physical or emotional depletion, terrified that if we take even a single honest pause, the people around us will realize we are not the invulnerable monuments we pretend to be. Consider how this exhausting mechanism operates in the smallest, most familiar habits of your daily routine. Think of that specific, sharp contraction that tightens your throat when you are waiting for a text message or an email that refuses to arrive, or when you find yourself checking your phone every few minutes for a fleeting sense of reassurance. In those anxious moments, your mind is behaving exactly like the young novice, trying to bind the clay jar in stiff, wax-coated armor. You are looking to an external screen to give you a temporary guarantee of safety, hoping that a notification will act as a perfect seal to cover the raw, porous vulnerability within your chest every time you compulsively review a minor social interaction, replaying a perceived mistake over and over in your thoughts. You are kneeling on the hard floor of your life, using the blunt tool of self-correction to desperately scrape away your humanity. You are demanding that your sensitive, organic form behave like a flawless piece of polished steel, completely immune to the natural friction of living with others. Maybe you walk through your days carrying a quiet, suffocating dread that you have somehow fallen permanently behind the pace of the world, comparing your unwritten history to the smooth, curated outer surfaces of the lives around you. You see their apparent energy, their predictable progress, and their unblemished containers, and you instantly launch the second arrow of shame into your own spirit. You tell yourself a bitter story that your chronic fatigue your sensitivity, or your need for slow integration is a proof that your container is fundamentally defective. This comparison turns your everyday life into a continuous, exhausting tribunal where your body is always found guilty of being too fragile. You want to rest. Your very muscles are crying out for a sanctuary of stillness. Yet a heavy layer of guilt prevents you from laying down your tools because you believe an empty reservoir has no right to occupy space until it has earned its fulfillment through relentless effort. Peace is not a distant, perfect state that you must build by completely rearranging your modern obligations or eliminating every source of stress from your calendar. Peace is practiced in the tiny, uncelebrated intervals of your regular day, in the spaces between your reactions, your worries, and your judgments. A single, unhurried breath taken before you unlock your phone or answer an intimidating demand is a profound expression of ancient Buddhist wisdom. It is a quiet moment where you choose to step back from the bow of your own performance, letting the rigid armor of your composure soften for just 10 seconds. In that brief pause, you are giving yourself permission to stop treating every anxious thought as an absolute command that must be obeyed, and every heavy feeling as a permanent verdict on your worth. You can care deeply about your responsibilities, your work, and the people who rely on your strength, without gripping the outcomes so tightly that you crush the vital air within your lungs. In a moment, this modern perspective will show us something even quieter. We must learn the gentle art of allowing our daily life to be porous, recognizing that our natural human limitations are not obstacles to our happiness, but the very gateways through which true connection enters our world. When you stop hiding your fatigue behind a mask of artificial invulnerability, you discover that your sensitivity is not a mistake of your design, but the raw material that allows you to feel the texture of reality. You are fully permitted to rest without earning it, to lay your heavy frame upon the earth before the work is finished, and to let your container be empty without apologizing for your emptiness. The deep ground of your life has never demanded that you be an airtight monument to deserve a place in the sun. It has always been fully prepared to cushion your weight and drink your vulnerability, exactly as you are. By choosing to let the wooden tools of your self-correction lay still during your daytime hours, you open up an internal sanctuary where your spirit can finally breathe in alignment with the natural flow of time. Think of how much internal space becomes available to you when you stop treating your changing energy levels as a dangerous crisis that must be managed with aggression. If your focus runs dry on a difficult afternoon, or if your physical form requires a slower, quieter pace than the schedules around you demand, you do not have to meet that transition with a barrage of self-hatred. You can simply sit with the uncertainty of your depletion, breathing softly through the contraction in your chest and allowing the moment to be unmapped for a while. You can be dedicated to your path without turning your dedication into a continuous trauma. And you can forgive yourself for your exhaustion without needing to pretend that the weight was never heavy. True transformation is not a magical cure that makes you immune to fatigue. It is the quiet, daily discipline of refusing to drive the second arrow of shame into the vulnerabilities you are already carrying as the noise of the external world begins to recede into the latter-night silence of your bedroom. Notice how the sharp, modern urgencies that drove your muscles all day begin to lose their terrifying proportions when you refuse to feed them with your calculations. The digital screens that demanded your constant management are now dark. The comparisons that shattered your peace are nothing but passing electrical impulses, and the future you have been trying to presolve does not possess a physical body in the room around you. There is absolutely nothing you need to fix from your pillow tonight, and no amount of later night checking will ever alter the design of tomorrow's events. You are entirely safe to let the hard crust of your competence dissolve into the darkness, allowing your presence to become as soft and porous as the unglazed earth that has been waiting all evening to cradle your rest. And perhaps this is where the teaching begins to touch your own heart, moving away from the practical adjustments of your daily routine and drifting toward the deep, unconditional stillness of a mind that has finally run out of boundaries. You have spent your day trying to keep your life from leaking, but tonight, the container is permitted to relax its walls completely, letting the remaining tension move outward into the dark. You do not have to fill your reservoir to deserve an undisturbed slumber, and you do not have to repair your fragile borders to be worthy of a soft bed and a quiet mind. Let the modern world go. Let the performance fade from your limbs, and let your awareness rest quietly on the very outer edge of this passing hour. The darkness within the subterranean room has now become completely total, velvet, and undisturbed, as the final glimmer of the tallow wick naturally burns away into the cool evening air. The deep storehouse cut into the hillside has dropped all its daytime definitions, settling into a profound, unmonitored sanctuary, where the stone walls and the dark earth are no longer separate things. There are no more modern schedules to calculate from your pillow tonight, no more frantic expectations to measure, and no more internal fractures to police with your overthinking. The hours of looking into your exhaustion, identifying the rigid armor of your resistance, and letting your tired fingers drop the scraping spatula have brought you to an absolute baseline of stillness. The words themselves are beginning to lose their edge, softening and spreading flat like raw earth under a midnight fog, leaving nothing behind but a wide, wordless weight that is cradling your entire physical frame. Allow your body to become immensely, completely heavy as you sink into the quiet gravity of the room around you. You might imagine that your bed has become like a soft, hollow nest scooped directly into the damp loam floor of that ancient cellar, a space where the ground rises up to meet your depletion with a perfect, uncritical security. You do not have to hold yourself together right now, and you do not have to maintain the boundaries of an airtight existence to be protected in the dark. The mattress beneath you is fully capable of holding your spent muscles, your hollow spaces, and your quiet fragility without requiring a single movement of defense. You can let the heavy framework of your spine and your ribs unfasten their remaining tension, giving up the lifelong habit of standing as an unyielding monument against the changes of the world. The stiff, beeswax-coated linen cloth that you used to bind your sensitivity has been completely cut away, leaving your skin porous, cool, and open to the gentle dampness of the night. You have stopped trying to force your container to be invulnerable through sheer muscular willpower, and the intense internal pressure that was straining your joints has vanished entirely into the dark spaces of the room. The long, Heavy cords of your hypervigilance have been severed by a single downstroke of quiet awareness, leaving your hands empty, your palms upturned, and your spirit entirely at rest within its own natural shape. The great unglazed earthenware jar of your being no longer has to prove its perfection. To anyone, it rests securely in the soft, fertile hollow of the earth, its rough clay walls blending perfectly with the silence of the limestone blocks. Let your breathing become exceptionally quiet, a soft, slow movement of air that happens all by itself without any artificial rhythm or conscious measurement. Each long, peaceful exhalation is like the dark forest, nectar slowly seeping through the pores of the clay, moving outward into the loam without a single trace of conflict or friction. You are no longer hoarding your vital energy like a scarce treasure that must be hidden away from a predatory world. You are allowing your vulnerability to flow naturally into the vast, unconditional matrix of life that sustains every living thing on this earth. With every quiet breath you take, the distinction between what is inside the vessel and what is outside the vessel begins to blur and soften, until you are no longer a separate, fragile container fighting the darkness, but the very depth of the cellar itself. Your eyelids have become beautifully, profoundly weighted, as if the cool moisture of the underground valley has settled softly over your brow, closing out the restless images of your modern duties and inviting your attention to return home to its original nature. The courtrooms of your comparison have all fallen silent. The digital screens that demanded your constant performance are dark, and the deep shame of not being enough has no hard surface left to cling to. There is absolutely nothing you need to fix from your bed tonight, and no amount of Latinite calculation will ever refill an empty reservoir before the sun rises. The path ahead of you can remain completely unmapped, unfinished, and uncertain, for the deep ground beneath your frame knows exactly how to carry your life through the dark hours without your supervision. The teaching is no longer an explanation to be remembered or an idea to be practiced. It has settled completely down into the center of your chest, turning into a warm, spacious tranquility that belongs to you inherently. You are permitted to let your container run dry tonight. You are permitted to stop solving the long narrative of your life. Let yourself drift deeper and deeper into the quiet, reedy marshlands of a dreamless sleep where all human structures, all titles, and all standards of productivity fade away into an absolute, weightless peace. The universe is not waiting to break your craft. It is simply cradling your frame within its own immense, unmonitored rotation, allowing your tired clay to rest beneath the frost until the seasons naturally choose to turn, sinking down, resting back, letting the walls of your vessel dissolve completely into the supportive depth of the evening. What if the wholeness you have spent your entire life trying to protect was never inside an unbroken container, but was always the vast, unconditional earth that gathers every drop you let go?